Well, the world hasn't been getting warmer recently, but it is warmer than it was only several decades ago. So how worried should we be about it? Is it worth investing huge sums of money to try and reverse its effects? I'm now joined by Bjorn Lomborg. He argues that the I can't even say the word. These scary rhetorics used by people in climate change scientists are distorting the debate. Is that when you hear things like that we're, unless we do something, we're going to hell in a handbasket? Do you think that hinders the debate or action to counter it rather than help it?
I actually think it ends up making people less worried in the long run, because obviously it makes people feel good. It makes them feel like we really got to do something. But we've been doing this for 20 years, and we've managed to do virtually nothing with climate change. We've made a lot of promises, but actually the world has probably cut about half a percentage point. Remember, we probably increased our emissions since 1990 by about 50%. So we've done virtually nothing except spending a lot of money.
At the moment, it's your view, I understand, though, that you think that climate change, in the sense of the planet getting a bit warmer, is at the moment a net benefit to the planet overall. But I would suggest that if it continues to get warm, it ceases to be a net benefit.
Absolutely. We've looked at a lot of different problems in the world, and climate is one of them. And if you look at virtually all the economic models, they tell us moderate warming is actually a net benefit to the world, mostly because most of the rich countries are in the temperate zones, whereas the poor countries are in the tropical zones where it's already getting to be a problem. But it's important to recognize that's, in economist terms, it's a sunk benefit. We already got it. So what we're really talking about is what kind of climate do we want towards the end of the century? And there, yes, it is going to be a net negative for the world. So it is a problem we need to tackle. But the real issue is here, we're tackling it really, really poorly. We're essentially spending huge amounts of money. Take the EU 2020 policy. We're estimating it's going to cost about $250 billion a year. So that'd be, what, 170 billion pounds a year for Europe. And yet, after having spent all of that money every year for the rest of this century, we'll have reduced temperatures by 1/20th of 1 degree centigrade.
Which you can barely measure.
We can't measure it in 100 years.
I think Bjorn, especially when you wrote The Sceptical Environmentalist, was hugely misrepresented as saying that climate change isn't a problem and doesn't exist.
No, actually, never said that.
Actually, what you've always said is that climate change is happening, but the issue in the debate should be about climate change policy. And how do you respond to the fact of warming, which we basically all accept and which the IPCC bangs on about? Do you have high-cost and ineffective policies, or do you have low-cost and highly effective policies? And I think on the policy question, there's an awful lot that environmentalists have done where they've got it horrendously wrong. And one of the things that I find most difficult to sort of reconcile with in terms of the environmentalist movement is the implications for the poorest populations around the world. So, for instance, a huge number of green people that I know, a huge number of green people that read The Independent are massively in favour of organic food and against GM crops, which I think is disgusting and completely indefensible.
What would be a low-cost but highly effective solution or response to climate change?
I'm very happy you asked me that, because we asked 27 of the world's top economists that question, including 3 Nobel laureates. And they basically said if you spend the money on the current policies, for every pound you spend, you avoid 3 pence of climate damage. A very bad way of spending the money. But if you spend it on research and development into green energy, essentially make the next generations of green energy so cheap everyone will want to buy them, for every pound spent, you will avoid about 11 pounds of climate damage.
But you're asking us to invest in something that we don't know whether will come right. At the moment, we're putting money into wind and solar and biomass because although there is dispute as to how effective they are, they do provide alternative renewable sources of energy. You're asking us to put billions into things that may end up delivering nothing.
Well, the real choice, I think, is we're right now spending lots and lots of money, up to $250 billion a year in 2020, on things we know are not going to cut very much.
Such as
wind, solar, biomass.
Do you think we know that doesn't?
Well,
I mean, that's not what the German and the British governments or the Danish governments think.
No, it's going to cut a little bit, but reality is we're probably talking 3, 4, 5% of the European emissions. The rest is just going to be exported to China and elsewhere. So in reality, we're going to end up paying, and that's why we say for every pound you spend, you avoid about 3 pence of climate change. But if you spend it on research and development, we know very well, if you look at research in agriculture, for instance, from previous periods, yes, you don't know if that particular grant is going to work, but if you spend it across a vast range of different opportunities, some of them are going to work. And we really just need one or a few technologies to work.
There's been a change in the debate, and I would suggest the combination of the current hiatus in temperatures rising, plus the recession that hit everybody after the financial crash in 2008, have made, and you see it in the argument over energy bills in Britain now, it's tougher for politicians to get their green policies through.
Of course, and this was a government that said it was going to be the greenest government ever. And when David Cameron rebranded himself as a very modern Conservative, the two things that people most remember was, A, he replaced the Conservative torch with a green squiggle, and B, is he went off and hugged some huskies in the Arctic, I think it was. And we've come a hell of a long way from that. The fact is, green policies aren't hugely attractive. I mean, in Britain, as in America, and certainly as in China and India and all these other developing countries, if you want to get elected, it's not by saying have a green tax and slapping a green tax over. And in fact, Ed Miliband has put a price freeze for which I don't think will work, but it's a way of saying actually that's where the debate is in terms of energy. So I think green politics have become extremely unfashionable, which is a shame because there's a way of selling green politics, there's a way of boosting industry and
we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. They certainly have become more interesting. Thank you very much. Good luck with the book. It's just gone 12:30. Coming up in a moment, it's our monthly look at what's been going on in European politics. But now for the next 30 minutes, I've been joined by two former Tory MEPs who now belong to different parties. Edward Macmillan-Scott is now a Lib Dem MEP and Roger Helmer represents UKIP. So let's take a look at one of those stories in more detail. The decision by the European Parliament to tighten up environmental controls on fracking for gas. Is that a sensible thing for Europe to be involved in?
It's not sensible to apply those rules to exploratory drilling. This will hold back any kind of exploratory activity on shale gas in the UK. It will be damaging to our economy. It will stand in the way of recovery. But it's also a challenge for Cameron because he said he won't allow European rules to stand in the way of British shale gas. So now it's up to him to make good on that commitment.
What do you say?
Well, I've long taken the view that the European Union's impact on our environment is generally a benign one. I mean, we live in a continent which has seen in 2006 the Chernobyl disaster. And these things can happen. They shouldn't be allowed to happen. Regulation is important in the environment. We only have to look around the world and see how bad other countries are.
But since fracking, the environmental impact is overwhelmingly in the country where the fracking takes place.
No, the environment is universal. I mean,
No, but the actual fracking itself, of where you put the drills. If I put a drill into Morecambe Bay, it doesn't affect Marseille. So why shouldn't that not be left to a national parliament?
We are concerned to make sure that the rules for applying the technology are as sound as possible. That is both
But why isn't the job of Westminster to do that?
It's partly the job of Westminster, partly the job of the European Union. The European Union sets overall rules, and rightly so. And what we're doing in the European Parliament is looking at the best practice, and that's what's been arrived at. I think there's a general consensus on that, apart from some of the fringe parties who take a different view.
I think what's important for viewers to understand is the reason they are getting massive energy bills and that energy bills are going up as we speak, or one of the main reasons is the European Union's green pretensions. That is what is putting this enormous cost, additional cost on energy. It's why energy bills are going up.
Putting a lot of costs on energy too. It's not just.
Oh, indeed, but they are following
we have
European.
Added our carbon floor price, which set by Westminster, is a lot higher than the one set by Brussels.
Europe started out with this energy package. It's true that Westminster has actually made it worse.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think it's also fair to say that Europe actually leads the world in environmental policy. We're seeing that year after year.
Also leads the world in the most expensive energy.
It may be so, but it is the healthiest.
It is
it's the healthiest part of the planet, and that's why I think we should take some pride
Well,
in the investment we're making.
Energy poverty is not the healthiest.
European Commissioner Tajani, the industry commissioner, said just a few weeks ago, he said, we are seeing an industrial massacre in Europe because of the high price of energy. They're starting to realise, even in the Commission,
they're striking the right balance.
All right, I just wanted a few words on that, but we had a pretty good debate on it. Let's move on.